Mitch Albom has written 6 consecutive #1 New York Times bestsellers. Not only is he a best-selling author, he's a broadcaster, a journalist, a screenwriter, and a musician. What I haven't mentioned is his philanthropic work, including an orphanage in Haiti and a consortium of 9 different charities that aid the neediest citizens in his hometown of Detroit. His latest book is the sequel to The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. Please welcome the author of The Next Person You Meet in Heaven, Mitch Albom.
Thank you. Thank you.
I am so glad you're here today. The sequel. Now, generally speaking, the sequels never rise to the level of the original book, except in this case.
Thank you for saying that.
What a great book.
Thank you.
Okay, 15 years between the first one and that one. Why so long?
Well, I'm not really a sequel writer or a chapter book writer. I've never written a sequel before. Most of my characters die in the book, so they can't bring them back. But The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, which I wrote in 2003, was probably the book of all my novels that I've heard people ask me about the most. What happened to Eddie after the first stage of heaven? What happened to the little girl that he saved in that book? It was a movie, so a lot of people saw it. And so I've had a lot of questions about it, and I still wasn't so inclined to do a sequel. But then in the last few years, I went through a lot of loss in a very short period of time, and it got me thinking a little bit more about heaven. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do another book about heaven, maybe I'll just go back to the characters and see where I left them off, and that's what I did.
Well, it's kind of hard to talk about this book without going back to the first book. The first book is Eddie, and you based this loosely on your uncle, Eddie.
That's right.
Can you tell me a little bit about your uncle?
Yeah, it was my first novel, so, first novels, you tend to try to grab something from your real life, because you're a little unsure of yourself. But my Uncle Eddie was a World War II veteran. He died when he was 83, like the character in the book. And like the character in the book, he went through his life thinking he was a nobody and a nothing. He would always say, I never been nowhere, never gone nothing, never did nothing. He'd talk like that. And I always felt terrible because I adored him, and I couldn't make him feel good about himself. So he told me when I was a kid that he had died once for a brief period of time on an operating table in an open heart surgery, and that he actually lifted out of his body and looked down on the table and saw all of his dead relatives waiting for him at the edge of the bed. So, of course, as a little kid, you say, well, what'd you do, Uncle Ed? And he said, what'd I do? I told him, get the hell out of here. I'm not ready for any of you yet. And I didn't put that in the book, but ever since then, since I was a kid, I've always thought that's what happens to you when you die, that there are people waiting for you, because my uncle wouldn't lie to me, and there are people waiting for you. So I took that idea and I said, well, what if the people waiting for you aren't all your relatives? What if maybe 1 or 2 might be your relatives, but some of them are people that you just glanced in life for a minute, and you changed their life and they changed yours forever? Because we never know. You're driving down a highway, you start to drift off, somebody honks the horn and you don't hit them. Well, and you never see that person again. They may have just saved your life. So I thought, well, that'd be an interesting concept. And I put the book together where Eddie dies, he goes to heaven, he meets 5 people from his life who explained to him that he was not meaningless, that he might not have known it, but he did this that affected them and this that affected them, and his life affected many, many people.
What I love about both of these books is that you find that we are all connected in these unimaginable ways.
Right.
You're connected to people you don't think you're connected to. And this is Annie's story, who is connected to Eddie.
If you remember the first book, he dies saving a little girl from an amusement park crash. A cart is falling, and he yells at everybody, run, 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 and everybody runs one way, but this little girl runs the wrong direction. She ends up on the platform right underneath this thing. He dives to get her out of the way. He feels her 2 little hands in his, and then boom, the world goes black. And he wakes up in heaven and he dies saving her. Well, this book is about what happened to her after she was saved. When she grows up, goes through life thinking everything she's done is a mistake, because that moment was a mistake. And then she goes to heaven and goes on a heavenly journey of her own, meeting 5 people. And one of the 5 people that she meets is Eddie, which is where the phrase, the next person you meet in heaven, is, because all the people who have asked me, what happened to Eddie? What's the next stage? Well, after you meet your 5 people, then you become one of 5 people for somebody else to show them how they affected you in their life.
The first book, what I'm taking away is that everyone has value. The second book, as you mentioned, mistakes, but are they really mistakes?
Right. I don't believe any real mistakes. There are things that don't go the way that we want them to go, but if we really pay attention, we learn from them probably more than the things that go the way we do want them to go, and our lives change as a result. I know, because I'm sitting here with you, as a result of probably the biggest mistake I made that wasn't involved with my family in my life. I had a professor named Maurice Schwartz. I was very close with him in college. I took every class he offered. You know, he hugged me on graduation, told me to stay in touch with him, and then I made a mistake. I spent the next 16 years chasing my own ambitions and never got back in touch with him. And I only happened to see him one night on the Nightline program with Ted Koppel talking about what it was like to die from Lou Gehrig's disease. And that's how I found out that he was dying. Now,
You found out from television?
From television. And then I went to go see him, and one visit became another and another and another. And eventually I wrote the book Tuesdays with Morrie to pay his medical bills. It wasn't supposed to be a popular book or a big book in any way. And then my life changed. Well, think about that mistake that I made of not being in touch with him for those 16 years. If I hadn't made that mistake, I probably never would have written Tuesdays with Morrie, because I would have been seeing him all along. The thought never would have occurred to me. And yet look at how it changed my life, brought me here to you and all these people. So you can't foresee how the things are going to unfold in your life, including your mistakes.
Because life happens when you're planning for how you want your life to happen.
As John Lennon said, life is what happens to you when you're busy making plans.
Your books are ordinary people. Yes, extraordinary things may happen and tragedies happen, but at the heart, they're ordinary people.
I think people can relate to that more. You know, I'm not a highfalutin person. I've never been, and I live in Detroit. We're not very highfalutin up there. And I've always felt that there's more lessons to be learned from the everyday man, especially in a culture that so celebrates celebrities, but ignores people, the majority of people who are not celebrities.
As you said, you wrote the book to help defray the cost of Maurie's medical bills, and that's what you thought. Now, who knew it was going to become what it, I mean, in your wildest dreams, did you ever think?
No, and not just me. Nobody did. I mean, when I tried to get publishers to publish that book while Morrie was dying, and he told me he needed money for his medical bills, is the only reason I went. I went around to different publishers in New York. I said, look, I don't need a lot of money. I just need enough to pay his medical bills. And almost all of them said, not interested. No, it's boring, it's depressing, you're a sports writer, who's going to read a book like that? So it wasn't just me. And we finally found one publisher just before Morrie died, a few weeks before Morrie died, and they agreed to do it, give us the money so that I could give it to Morrie. I gave Morrie all the money, said, pay off your medical bills. I just want to do this for you. And then the book came out. They published 20,000 total copies for the whole world. And I thought I'd have them in the trunk of my car for the rest of my life. I'd be that guy who shows up on Thanksgiving, and say, hey, look what I got. And really, when it came out, it wasn't, Tuesdays with Morrie didn't light the world on fire or anything. It came out in August. I mean, who puts a book, meaning of life book out in August, And it just kind of, like this. But fortunately and blessedly, and I'm sure some of the people who were here were part of this, these were still in the days where if people read something, they could pass it on. If a bookstore and small bookstore owners, the small bookstores I'm talking about always have a cat in the window and in places like that. And people would go in and say, hey, there's this little book, it's good, pass it on. And it started to grow organically on its own and didn't even show up on a bestsellers list until October or November. And it had been out since August, and it didn't go to the top of it until the following April. So it was very, very unusual. It really was people just reading the book and passing it on. And for that, I'll be eternally grateful, not only to readers, but to small bookstores that created that. What
happened to you, other than fame and fortune, what changed for you after that?
Well, I would say that the biggest thing, I hope I've changed for the better. I believe I have. I was extremely ambitious prior to that. And the example I always give that crystallizes it is as a sports writer, which is where I was on television and did a lot of that. if somebody stops you in an airport, back in those days, they would say, you know, who's going to win the Super Bowl? And you'd be on like an escalator and you go, Patriots, and you just keep going, you know. Then all of a sudden, Tuesdays with Morrie came out, and people would say, oh, Mitch Albom, my mother just died of cancer, and the last thing we did was read your book out loud together. Well, you can't go, Patriots, you know. And so you have to stop. And I had to stop dozens of times every day, and still do to this day, to hear the real pathos of life. And as a result, I think I was sensitized to what's really going on with people on a daily basis, people who, you know, I look at this crowd, I do the same exercise in my mind. I don't know any of the people here, but I know a certain percentage of them are going home to someone who's sick or dying or dealing with some tragedy in their life, because we all have to. I didn't realize that before. And once you become sensitized to that, you become a different kind of person. It's like, you know, you're hearing the voices of people who are suffering or struggling, and you want to help.
I don't know quite how to define the next person you meet. Yes, it's about death, but it's also about a celebration. And you're better at explaining this. So.
Well, sometimes I get teased, you know, people say, why are you always writing about death? Why are you fascinated with death? I said, I really don't write about death. You know, in my books, if there's a death, it's usually one. I said, to me, like, books about death are like the serial killer books where, you know, they kill off 20 people in the first 10 pages, and they rip their heart out and they slice their throats. And, you know, I use death to get people's attention to talk about life. Because let's face it, if I say to you, you're going to live 50 more years, but let's talk about what's really important, you're going to go, I got 50 more years. I got to go shopping. But if I say to you, you're going to live 5 more minutes, now you're going to talk to me about what's really important. And so I kind of employ that sort of technique in the book. I say, hey, let's all remember we're all going to end. Now that I've got your attention, let's talk about what matters in life. And the next person you meet in heaven is the same thing. It's about a young woman, Annie, the little girl who Eddie pushed out of the way, who goes through her life thinking everything she does is a mistake. She doesn't even realize it because she doesn't remember the accident. She was kind of traumatized by it, but she has this vague recollection that something went really wrong when she was a little kid. And she just views everything that she's going to do in life as a mistake because we're haunted by the things that happen to us that we don't understand. But that's a message for the living, you know, and she goes through loss and loneliness, and I talk about all those things as messages for the living, not for, I mean, once we get to heaven, you don't need my books, you know, believe me, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a better book up there. So this is, what I'm writing are about, you know, guides to life.
And connecting with the universe, connecting with other people. Do you wake up in the morning and think, I wonder what kind of impact I'm going to have on strangers that
No, I tend to wake up in the
today.
morning and go, I am so tired. I'm not profound in any way. No, I'm, you know, I was blessed to have that success that Tuesdays with Morrie did later in my life. I wasn't 20. I was 37 when I went to see Morrie, and 39 when the book came out. And, you know, I'm not fooled by, it's not me. First of all, Tuesdays with Morrie was Morrie. I carried the water, and I told the story of it. But the things that people remember from that are the things that Morrie said. And I've never kidded myself about the impact that I'm having. All I'm really doing is like tickling, you know, the nerve endings for people to start to think about stuff on their own, so that when people come up to me and open their wallet and say, "This is my Morrie," well, they always had that person. All I did was write a book that kind of, you know, put into words what they were already feeling. So I don't look at me having the impact. I just look at me as, you know, maybe stirring the pot a little bit.
But you have had an impact on your own community. What you have done in Detroit is pretty remarkable. You have found what the city needed, and you put it together.
Well, I was during the Super Bowl in 2006, we had the Super Bowl. They'll never send it to us again, I'm sure, but they sent it to us once. We had a new stadium, and it was so cold. And I read a story about a party that they were going to have for the homeless, a Super Bowl party for the homeless. I said, what is that? Well, when I looked into it, it was really just a euphemism for that they were going to get all the homeless off the street so that they wouldn't bother the customers. And they were going to put them in this one big shelter for 3 days, and then they were going to kick them out into the snow on Monday morning as soon as everybody left. And I just thought that was so cruel. You don't give somebody something and take it away. So I went down to spend a night in a homeless shelter, not pretending to be anybody other than I was, to write about the experience, and then write says, this is not something you give and take away. While I was online at the shelter, you know, I got my bed, I got my bar of soap and my towel, and then I'm online for the meal. And I'm online, and there's a guy in front of me, and he turns around and he looks me up and down. He says, aren't you Mitch Albom? So I said, yeah.
Wow.
And then he looks me up and down again. He says, so what happened to you? And, you know, after I laughed, I had one of those profound kind of eye-opening moments. I said, you know what? That's a perfectly good question. You know, why not me? We're all just a few bad things away from being on that line. And I wrote a story about the experience, and I guess I must have thrown my heart into it because I was seeking to try to raise $60,000, which was how much money it would take to keep all the partiers in the shelters until April when it got warm. And do you know that in 1 week, I got $360,000 from people just sending $25, $5, $10 worth of small donations. And with that, I created something called Say Detroit, S-A-Y Detroit, which is Super All Year Detroit instead of Super One Weekend. And it has now grown to, it's 9 separate charities. It's a multi-million-dollar operation. We give 100% of all the money we take in, 100% of it back out into the community, no expenses, no costs. And it's been one of the great things that I've had a chance to be involved in my hometown.
Do you think that some people are just wired differently and have a higher social conscience, and maybe the rest of us need to explore this and work harder?
No, you know, you'd be giving me or other people too much credit for that. I think everybody has it inside them. I think you just have to be moved by something. I happen to be moved by that. When I went to Haiti, I happen to be moved by that. I think most people are pretty good-hearted, and I think they just sometimes get scared to, like we have a volunteer program where we get people to come out every month. And I always say when they come out, I say, here's the first thing you got to know. You don't have to come back next month. You don't have to come to every one of these, you know. And they're like, oh, thank you. You know, because people get afraid of like getting hooked into the needy, you know, like the need is never going to end. But you can do a little and you can do a lot.
In your latest book, The Next Person You Meet in Heaven, I see themes of sacrifice and service. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, well, she meets 5 people, and each one has a lesson for her. So that's
and it's
amongst
like the flip
things.
side of what Annie has depression.
Yeah.
Annie's going through some things.
Yeah.
And when she is in service, it seems to fix it.
Yeah, well, one of the, I guess I could say this because this has become public knowledge. One of the people that Annie meets in heaven is her old dog. Not a person, but a dog. And I had no idea what I was tapping into when I wrote that. Boy, like, I mean, like I started getting letters. I knew it. I knew it. I get to see Fido again, you know. And I was just trying to, you know, come up with an interesting thing. But her dog can speak. She takes the form of a woman. And the dog is there to teach her a lesson about loneliness. And the message about loneliness is that loneliness isn't really a thing. Loneliness is just the way you happen to look at it. It's a shadow. There is no disease called loneliness. You can't catch it. You can't find it in your cells or under a microscope. It's how you choose to look at something. And what the dog tells her is the end of loneliness is when you realize how much need there is in the world and how you could fulfill that need for somebody else. And once you do that, you won't be lonely anymore. And I have discovered that so many times in my life. If I feel bad about myself or I'm down or I'm depressed or something, and then all of a sudden I run into someone who's got it worse than me or someone who's hungry or homeless or needs a hand, a kid or whatever, and suddenly you're not thinking about being lonely anymore. You're thinking about how significant you can be to somebody else. And I think that lesson plays over many times.
In both of these books, nobody has a clue that this is their last day on Earth.
Right.
So if we did have a crystal ball, how different do you think we would actually live?
Well, Maury gave me a little exercise for that when I would visit with him. He'd say, pretend that there's a bird on your shoulder every day, and you turn to the bird every morning and you say, is today the day I'm going to die? And of course, most days of your life, all but one, the bird's going to say no. But when the bird says yes, are you prepared? Are you able to say, all right, well, I've been leading all my days ready for you to say yes anyhow, and I've led them by the principles that I was going to know that it was going to be the day you said yes, so today's the day you said yes, I'm ready to go. If all you want to do is say, whoa, whoa, wait, just a few more days now, then obviously you've been living thinking that you got forever, and then all of a sudden you realize you don't. So I think if people do that little exercise and then guide their daily activities accordingly by saying, what if today was the last day? I don't know that you would be here with me on this, I don't know any of you would be here. We might be, with our families or with our loved ones doing the thing we love the most, being where we love to be the most. So, obviously you can't live every second like that or nobody would get any work done and all the, but you could certainly guide your life in that direction.
And you try to?
I try to, yeah. I am much closer to that in my life now than I was when I was younger and more spry and all the rest of it and thought, I really had control of everything.
So if you had this success, like you said, at 20, at 25, would you be this person?
Well, it wasn't the success. I had success. I was very successful, too successful. I had money. I had success. I had notoriety. I was on television. People asked for my autograph. All that kind of stuff didn't come from my writing books. What came from my writing Tuesdays with Morrie was a perspective of how unimportant that success really was. Okay. So the way that I have changed is to stop making that my end game, to stop making that my goal. I still have some of that, because that's what you get if you write a lot of books, you're on television, whatever. But that's not my purpose in doing anything anymore.
I want to talk about the dedication of this book, and it's to the little girl of our lives who was already brightening heaven, and her name was Chika.
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 Yeah. Well, you probably don't have enough time for me to tell everything about Chika, but I'm writing, my next book is actually about her. It comes out later this year.
I'm so glad to hear that.
So she's right in my head because I spend every day with her. But in the short of it, so I have an orphanage in Haiti that I have operated since 2010, the year of the earthquake. I'm there every month. I have 47 children that we raise there. One of those kids was born 3 days before the earthquake, and on the third day of her life, she was in a one-room building with her mother, and the world shook and the building came down around them. She was on her mother's chest, and they were naked to the sky. And the third night of her life, she slept in the sugarcane fields, and that's where she slept for the next 6 months. So she was born pretty tough. And she came to us when her mother died, giving birth to her baby brother in that same rebuilt house. She was 2.5 when that happened, and she was a bossy, funny little kid. And then at 5 years of age, she developed a brain tumor. And we brought her to America thinking that we could just get it taken care of, thinking it was a stage 1 kind of cyst or something. And the doctors came out after the operation and they said, it's stage 4. It's something called DIPG. No kid ever survives it, and she probably has 3 or 4 months left to live. You should probably take her home to Haiti and just let her die there. And my wife and I looked at one another because we knew Chika was a fighter, and we said, if she's going to fight, we'll fight as long as it takes. And instead, we basically adopted her. She became our little girl. She never went back. And for the next 2 years, she fought that thing, and we traveled around the world trying to find a cure. And although we were not successful in finding a cure, she did live longer than almost any kid who gets that. And in that time, blessed us in a way that is indescribable for me, other than to say that when you get to become a father or a mother of sorts for the first time in your late 50s, you really have an appreciation of children in a way that you never did. And she taught me more than probably anybody in my life, even though English wasn't even her first language. So I dedicated the book to her, and this next book that I'm writing about is about all the things I learned about how you make a family. It doesn't matter if they look like you, it doesn't matter if they talk like you, it doesn't matter if they come from you. That was as tight a family as any, and we were blessed to have her.
That is beautiful. Because Chika is the next book, I just want to ask this. In this book, Annie has a profound loss.
Yeah.
And I am wondering if her pain really was your pain and your wife's pain?
So there's a moment, you're not revealing something like that.
Okay.
So Annie, one of the mistakes that Annie feels that she makes is that she gets pregnant young and has a baby, and the baby only lives a couple of days. And before she could even feel, and the baby's been in the hospital the whole time, you know, so she couldn't really hold it or anything. And of course, we went through that with Chika in so many hospitals. And so she doesn't really feel like a mother. And in heaven, there's a moment where she gets to hold this baby again, which of course is you're gonna make me tear up here now, but of course is my fantasy and dream. And there's a line in the book that says, when the child is out of her arms, she has to go on to the next stage of heaven. I think it says something like she felt totally fulfilled and totally vacant at the same time, which is what having and losing a child is like. And that's the best way that I can describe that experience, is you are ultimately fulfilled and never more vacant when you have and then you lose a child.
The book is The Next Person You Meet in Heaven. Mitch Albom, I cannot thank you enough for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm Ann Bocock. Please connect with us and join me on the next Between the Covers.